So does anybody have any questions about this context, schedule context that we're operating in within? Okay. What is next on the agenda? Okay, school committee update. Beth Ann. Is Steve coming?
Yes, we had another meeting.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I can, Margaret asked me to update folks on our school committee retreat, which Brooke was also at, and the retreat was really productive. I think we had some really good conversations around what our priorities are for, you know, whether we're thinking about a 9 through 12 or 7 through 12. In general, one of our members, Member Manning, who was, as many people know, is the principal at Collins for a long time. She really has more expertise than any of us when it comes to working with kids that age. So she brought up a lot of really important points around kind of what we should be thinking about and what we need to highlight when we're talking about our 7th and 8th graders being in the same space with high school kids. I think for me, the thing that rose to the top was just thinking about space and resources, and you know, I think we all from our own high school experiences know that 9th and 10th graders are usually up to bat last when it comes to accessing equipment, materials, space, and so I think that one of the conversations we were having was around making sure that our, you know, we don't have 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th graders not being able to access or being last in line to access some of the really great things that we plan on doing with this building. And just prioritizing the experiences of younger kids and making sure that that's always in our minds. I think it's a really good opportunity to include our 9th graders into that mix. 9th graders, you know, Mayor and I both have a 9th grader. It can be a rough transition. It's not an easy thing to do. So making sure that we're still focused on those younger kids and making sure that they have the resources that they need and that they can use them, whether those are CTE resources. Brooke talked about a black box theater, which made us all feel a lot better. We did take a straw poll, and I think at the time of the retreat, all but one of us was in favor of voting for a 7 to 12, and I would imagine that's probably going to stick. We don't fluctuate very much, you know. Once we said it out loud, we don't tend to mess around. So once we take that vote, which I guess is going to be January now.
Yes, I'm hoping.
Yeah, I think I think we're prepared for a January vote.
Yes.
I think that's, you know, what folks indicated, but with a lot of kind of caution around some of the really important issues that Member Manning raised for all of us, which I think we're all going to kind of lean into as the process goes along. Anything else?
I thought she made a really, point that has sort of stuck in my brain at one of the community meetings about the integrity of the middle school experience, and that has real, for me, that has real resonance. That if you're going to make the bigger school, Mary is the chief cheerleader for the integrity of the middle school experience, and it's really a really important part of what we're talking about.
And we're hearing that from parents also, because our middle school, which is the middle school experience, which used to be called the middle school pilot, is really effective, and we've seen it with our attendance data, with our MCAS data. It's going really well, and so when we're talking about the ed plan, we're not going to veer far from that plan. It's a good plan, and it's working for our kids. So I think the ed plan will be sort of also with an eye toward looking forward and how can we adapt and adopt some of the great stuff we're doing in the middle school program actually in the upper grades, because it's pretty innovative way of teaching and having kids own their own academic experiences. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because that's also a big part of it is, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel. If we change our you know, the grade configuration, we're doing really good stuff in the middle school.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone have any questions before we move on? Sorry.
All right, so next up, I'm gonna turn it over to Nate and Rick to talk about working groups. So, the background here is that we've established already 2 working groups. There was a communications working group that had been established before the OPM came on, and there is a finance working group that you remember we voted on. Nate and Rick have recommended and Dominic have recommended some others. So Nate and Rick, at my request, took a stab at who might be in those groups, but I want them to talk about it some more.
Sure, yeah, so we, as I just mentioned earlier, we're really starting to intensify the work. And so we thought it made sense to have smaller working groups. And we identified folks who we thought had the skill set within one of these working groups. And so while we're not mandating that you be part of these working groups, we hope that you'd be willing to participate in one of these working groups. Just to get I think it's just easier to get the work done in smaller numbers. So if you have some concerns about it, feel free to reach out to me directly. We're hoping you're going to say yes. If there's another group that you see, maybe you're not on it, but you're interested in it, happy to entertain that as well. But we don't want to pressure you, but we would hope that you would be willing to join that working group.
And they're gonna kind of ramp up on a rolling basis, so the immediate one would be, design's gonna be starting right away, because these guys are off and running. So we have a call tomorrow, our first kind of design working group, and that's the one I think we're gonna vote
Right,
on
today,
tonight.
right.
But the others are still kind of fluid, so like Nate said, if you feel left out because we're put on one and you really want to be on it, or what have you, then now's or in the next couple of weeks is the time to kind of raise your hand.
Although I will say, for the design group with Paul and Betsy, you don't have an option. I'm taking executive privilege.
That's called voluntold.
Any questions on these working groups? And again, maybe you don't feel comfortable expressing your concern in this forum, so if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me directly. Okay?
You want to take a vote?
Yeah, so we're gonna, so we'd like to move forward with the design working group. And so I'm gonna make a motion that we establish today, December 19th, a working group that will will be comprised of Rick, Paul, and Betsy. Just need a second. Second made by Keith. Any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you.
So we'll come back to that, but that is good, and so
One other thing, I'm sorry.
Yep.
We're probably gonna need, just for order, probably a person to chair each working group. It's not a heavy lift. It would be more of kind of scheduling the meetings and maybe reporting out at the larger group. And, you can decide amongst yourself who's going to do that, but it would be helpful for us to have every group have a chair. Sorry, Margaret.
Nope, that was it. So we'll come back to this. It'll be on the agenda in January to check and see if anybody, once you've had a chance to absorb this. But thank you. I think that will allow us to keep the conversation going over the next few weeks as the design team moves forward. So speaking of moving forward, the next thing we're going to talk about are the preliminary design program deliverables. So I think you're going to have a hard time reading this on the screen, but hopefully, Brooke, do you want to talk about this? You want me to talk about it?
Sure,
We're just
I
gonna
can,
need you to speak a little louder.
okay, can you hear me? Increase my volume. So on the screen here, and everyone, I think, will get a copy of this deck, and it will also be posted, so you can spend some more time. There's a lot of content tonight, so don't be alarmed. You can go home tonight and spend some time with it before, to help you fall asleep tonight. So some of us need to do that. So here in front of you are just the major requirements for the PDP, and you'll hear those words a lot. That's the preliminary design program. And the feasibility study is broken into 2 phases, the PDP and the PSR. This is the PDP phase we're in now. And the major deliverables are here. We have to develop the educational program. the space summary, which is how many spaces, what the square footages are, what the spaces are, and what is the total gross square footage and net square footage of the building. And when you talk about middle school, that's really important if a middle school is in this building, because what are the specific spaces that school needs within the building to function in the way that you were just talking about, and that's very important. And let me pause for a second, because I meant to introduce Claudia and Stephen from Samiotis, sorry, looked at you, and they're our civil engineer, and we invited them tonight because they have a lot of content on existing conditions, and that's one of the things we're looking at. And you know my colleagues, Patrick and Stephen, so we're all here tonight, and you'll hear from everyone in a bit. So educational program, initial space summary, which we're starting to develop, evaluation of existing conditions. We almost brought every consultant tonight, but we decided to spare you because most of them will say, anybody want to guess what they'll say? The system is at the end of its useful life, and that's really what most of the content was. So a lot of those consultants, we let them stay home, except the lucky ones here with us tonight. So that's really important. We have to look at site development requirements, and then we look at the preliminary evaluation of alternatives. And that's what are the site plans and building plans for no work, code upgrades only, renovation addition, and new construction. And we have to do that generally for the different grade configurations from the start. So that's why we need to finalize the program so we can do those design options, because you know we need a program to develop those options. And then there's local actions and approval certification. So that's really what we're doing. You could look at that when you have time later, or just have faith that we will present to you the process we're going through and the documents that are required to get to the end of that submission. One of the things that needs to be done is the educational program, and we had a really good meeting today, and I'll let Margaret take this slide.
Yeah, Lisa was going to talk about this because Steve has actually delegated to Lisa the preliminary drafting of the educational program, but she was ill, became ill today and couldn't come. So I will just say that the ed program, and I might have probably mentioned this before, it really drives the project. It's very tempting for the building to start driving the process, but this is really about kind of getting a document of, and there's a list of these here, I'll read a few of them. So grade and school configuration policies, class size policies, school scheduling, teaching methodology and practices, curriculum delivery methods, teacher planning, professional development, how many lunches a day you have, transportation policies, security, visual access, and a typical day and a week in the life of a student. This is the recipe book that the MSBA gives the district and says, tell us about these things, and those in turn drive the space summary, which determines how many spaces you need at what size. So very grateful to Lisa for her work on this. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here tonight. But that is one of the things, if you go back and look at my schedule, you'll see the thing that is on the district's plate right now is this educational program. So any questions about
Can I
that?
just jump in on that?
Yeah.
We, Lisa and I traded some emails about this as well. We have a lot of language for other things that we've written around our educational division. We have a portrait of a graduate for the high school level. We've also done a lot of work at the middle school level around some redesign work related to our middle school was a middle school pilot, which is now the 8th grade experience. And we want to make sure that the language in the educational plan captures those conversations we've had about student-centered learning, project design, and really complements what our We've also, I also was part of writing an ed plan in a prior district, and so we have that language as well. And so we'll, I guess the due date for that is when?
Well-
I know that I have time over the break.
Yeah, I mean, so these two things are sort of enmeshing and kind of iterating, right? So the narrative about the program and the space summary. The space summary, which derives from the ed program, drives the work of the design team. So we are starting to have, Brooke started, Kim Carter and Lisa, I think, have commented on, we're starting to have a space summary that we think reflects the narrative, but we have to kind of work on both of them and put them together. So, and I'll also say, and you can see this on the schedule, the space summary goes into the PDP, so this committee votes on it, but the space summary also has to be voted on by the school committee, so the school committee has to vote on it. They actually have a signature line on it. So ideally, I think it would be great to be starting the new year with a draft of the ed program, understanding that we're going to make edits to it along the way. Because that feeds into also sharing it with not just this group, but also the school
And the
committee.
school committee ultimately will vote on the design.
We would recommend that, yes.
Jenna?
Yeah, I just had a question, and just because I haven't been through this kind of process at this level, related to like the whole, spaces that they will, MSB, they will give you money for and ones they don't. When you're doing the ed program, are you talking about all the spaces and the interaction, like athletes using the athletic facilities and performing art facilities? Like, because I would think if you're developing a space program, you have to consider everything, but I don't know, a lot of the focus obviously is fine on the academics, but how much does it address all the other things?
So you're thinking about adjacencies particularly?
Yeah, adjacencies and just like from a space perspective, how much space you need if you're also building and
Yeah.
performing.
I mean, everything, every space in the building is isolated, defined, discussed, written about, and considered. And this is where you have the opportunity, if the MSBA does not have that space in the base template, you have an opportunity to advocate for that space. So I tell the story, we had a district where, I worked in a district where they needed an extra band room because they had so much of their population in band. Their football players would change at halftime and be in the band. So they advocated and gave a narrative around why that space was needed, and it was approved. So this is the time to really define those spaces. And I think we just want to say that you have a very big building here, so you've
The
put
existing building.
existing building, so you've put a lot of spaces, you have a lot of art rooms. We have to be careful that we're putting in the spaces that are needed for the programs, the population, and the square footage. So it may look different than it does here, so just be aware of that. And you'll see that, what you're going to see in that document is all of your existing spaces, all of the proposed spaces, and you'll see the size comparisons between the two. Some of your existing spaces will be smaller than the new ones, and some will be much larger. And you'll be able to see that comparison. But we don't forget anything. If you need, storage for your uniforms for band, we need to know that. We don't want to find those. So we have a lot of lessons learned here at this table, and we don't want to find those things out later. We want to flush that out now. So the narrative that's being written here on this educational program will help define the needs for Salem High School. Special ed is a really tricky one because there's nothing, every district is unique. So we are really closely looking at that, but every program will be considered. And I think, hopefully everyone here will look at the space summary, and you might have a particular expertise that you can hone in on and say, I don't know if that's right, because you can all have a voice in that, and you should.
Now, if you look at the schedule of what they're doing, so in January, they're really starting to iterate options. It's very hard to iterate options if they don't have a sense of the size of the building. The other thing, Brooke, do you want to say a little bit about the sort of circulation space and so there's the,
Sure.
what we call the net
Right.
space, which is the space of the rooms,
So-
but then there's a gross number.
Right, so what you'll see in the program, and I think, you know, a draft can go out after the holidays. We'll be getting a lot more information, but all of the spaces you'll see have a net square footage on those spaces. So that's like, if I went in this area, it would be, I would measure the inside of the room, right? Inside the walls. But the grossing factor is if you take all the net and it adds up to 300,000 square feet, pop quiz, you know I like pop quizzes, I give them to him all the time. So the grossing factor is 1.5. So if your net doesn't add up to 300.
The MSBA reimburses on one.
You're allowed to go up to 1.5, so that's for stairs, toilets, wall thickness, circulation, I said, you know, the hallways, so that's in that grossing factor. So let's say you have a 200,000 square foot net, what's the gross?
I was told there would be no math.
I'm asking you, Nate, what's the gross? You have 200,000 net, what's the gross?
300.
Right, 300,000. It's basically half the net plus, you know, the net, 50% of that is, you know, those two added up is the gross. So you're not allowed to go over that, and MSBA is really, they're strict about certain things.
Really?
That's one of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I know the answer to this, but if you're likely consolidating schools where you have a 7 and 8 combined with a high school where you want potentially more circulation space, more common spaces, more separation, there's no consideration for that. They don't have a different grossing factor for that.
No, you would, if there's something you want, you should program it. Put it in the net. So you don't really need bigger hallways. They're gonna be big enough, but if you want a particular collaboration space for 7 and 8, if you want them to have, I mean, we can divide the building the way we want. We can take the total net square footage for media and put some of it in the middle school, some of it in the high school. If you want to do something like you're saying, some of that needs to be programmed in the net. So we would actually put it as a line item, and we'll talk about what that is. If they allow us to have 2 art rooms, or I think it's 3 art rooms, right? 3 art rooms, is that enough? I have to remember if it was 2 or 3. But is that enough for middle school and high school, and where are they located? So we'll go through that, but think about what that might look like as that's in your brain. So you might want to send an email to the co-chairs and say, I'm thinking about maybe this kind of space. So everybody has an option to throw things in the mix, but we're also very sensitive to the total gross square footage, because that will have the greatest impact on cost. Square footage, I think you heard us say it in the interview, and we're gonna say it again, because we need to make sure this project is fiscally responsible, which means we're not putting in program that we don't need. So we have to scrutinize everything, and that's why we want to be careful that if you have a really big space somewhere, do you really need that space? And most people don't miss what they have. They're just scared to give it up. So that's a really important conversation, and thank you for raising those issues.
One quick
Yeah,
follow-up.
please.
And just quickly, I know we've already putting my thesis and facilities hat on. How do you treat mechanical space? Because a lot of buildings that I've worked on, mechanical, electrical, and all the spaces needed for the maintenance and janitorial stuff gets like pushed aside, and they end up a lot of times getting not what they need. Is that considered part of that 1.5?
Yeah.
Or can we specifically say we want enough space for these things?
I think we should, it is in the 1.5, some of it can be programmed, and the more detail we get now, the less headaches we're gonna have later. So, you know, we can go through it with you to say, because we talk to our, you know, mechanical engineers and say, how big do you need the mechanical room? How big do you need the electrical room? What do you need? And then do we have a custodial room? Does a custodial have a storage area, a workshop? And we can give you examples of other schools that have it and say, okay, this is, because it'll tug on the grossing factor.
We also have
right?
we have a pretty good handle now, especially with zero net energy schools on, if you're gonna go full ground source heat pump, your interior mechanical space needs gonna be this. If you go air source heat pump, it's probably gonna be this. So we have enough past projects at scale that we have a good sense starting out on what those interior net numbers should be.
Yeah,
It gets so tight.
They can't even get in.
Yeah.
yeah. I think the best thing to do is to just show you examples, and we could go through them. But think about the spaces that may not show up in the grossing factor, and what do we want to include? And that's really the work that's going on with this, which is really, really critical work, probably some of the most important work of the whole project, because this sets the foundation for what we do from this point forward. And also this will include outside spaces, parking, exterior learning areas. They're not programmed in. There's no square footage for that, but we still need to know that and define that so everybody can do their work. Okay? So
All right,
we'll
So,
go,
any other questions? We're actually kind of on time so far, so we will move on to department survey samples, which Perkins and Will wanted to share the survey stuff they've drafted, which, again, very hard to read, but what
Just-
can you tell us about what we're
so
looking at?
what we can tell you is that we worked, some of you met Dr. Dr. Erica Atlin, who helped us with these surveys. She works on them through a research perspective as well as taking the information that we gathered from visioning and the documents provided. We've put together drafts for the community, for the faculty and staff, and the students. And these, what you'll see is when you see the draft, it goes into it can go in, you can do it on your phone. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. The more people who completes this, the better, because we have more data. And we're going to put this out when people get back and ask for them back on January 15th, because if it takes 15 minutes, we would like the information earlier. This information might also help inform the work that we're doing in the educational program. So that is very exciting. The faculty survey was put out a couple of times, and some of you have it, and if anyone's particularly interested in this work, I'm sure the co-chairs would be willing to share it with you. So that is that. And I'll just lean into the next one, which is we've also put together department surveys, and we have a link for the middle school to fill out and the high school to fill out. We are not leaving the middle school out of any of the conversations, and the links will be noted as such. So the middle school, we didn't put the CTE spaces in the middle school survey. We thought that might be too much, but basically you'll see a series of questions, and the department, it will be up to the superintendent and others to determine how to do this, but we recommend the department head, someone brings together the appropriate colleagues to fill these out, so they build consensus. At one point, I personally made a really silly mistake of giving one to everyone in the whole school, and that was a mistake. You want to build consensus, so art will get one, music will get one, guidance, special ed, all the CTE spaces, custodial, everyone will get one, and they'll provide us with some information. So this is ready to go. And again, I think most of these will go out right in the new year, because we're not going to put these out. So those are two really great pieces of work that are ready to go. So again, if anybody, yes, please.
Question on when you say community survey, are you talking about the greater Salem community or the school?
It can be, you can put it out to as many people as you want and whoever you want to put it.
I guess my question is, and maybe we should be patient, so how does the greater Salem community, one, know that this survey exists, and two, that it is really important that they at least look at it, because I know, surveys, the city sends surveys all the time, and, we fill them out, I fill them out, but I don't know what the percentage of those who receive the
that's part of the input we will want to receive. However, look at the survey through the lens of someone in the community. I think it wouldn't be up to us to tell you, but the more outreach you provide and the more voices that you get from this survey, the better our outreach will be. Nate?
And is this the beginning of the campaign for the ultimate?
Sure.
I mean, this is the first, like, is this the first interaction with the greater, like, Paul's not a parent, Paul was a parent of Salem school kids, but he's not anymore. He wouldn't get this if it only went to Salem
Not knowing
families.
what the content of the survey is, if the survey is being developed specifically to create the preliminary design program, that makes sense to try to narrow, but if it's also, because you could get, the jacuzzi, the sauna, you get all this stuff coming from, if you open it up to a much larger community that doesn't understand what education in Salem is, that I get. If it's a mechanism to alert more of the greater Salem community that this is going on, here's an opportunity for you really to weigh in. So I don't, surveys are always generated for a purpose.
Right, we tried to tailor these, they're not the same for each one. The community survey might ask, and I think not just might, but it asks, how might you use the facility? Because this is a community building. Might you use the clothing, food pantry, health services? So we're trying to tailor those questions that are more general. We're not really asking about teaching and learning per se. What is your interaction to the building? That kind of thing. So it also needs to be translated, if we're gonna provide translation.
I was gonna ask you, what's the timeline on that, or?
I mean, but, as soon as it would be equitable to send them out at the same time, translated, but I don't know how many you need to have translated. The students, maybe, the staff. I mean, we can talk.
The community one definitely needs to.
Yes, I know the community, so, that doesn't all have to go out at the same time. We could do the faculty and staff. I mean, it just depends on how fast we can get it translated and in there, but I think the community one obviously needs to be translated so we provide more access to the information. So, you could look at it if that is an interest to you.
No, I mean, the content, I'm sure, is the right content. It's just, when you ask the greater Salem community, it begs the question, is there an opportunity now to get more people involved in filling out the survey? I mean, I attended 2 or 3 of the forums. I mean, it was good, reasonably good turnout, but not what I was expecting. I was expecting a lot more people. And it's not the fault of anybody, it's a starting process. And this is you don't have to go to a place for this one.
Right.
Zoom meeting actually seemed to have more people involved in
Right.
this so it gives us this opportunity perhaps to get more of the Salem community, if it's important for them to weigh in at this time.
Well, I guess, I keep saying online it's a community asset, so it does make sense for 2 purposes. Number one, to your point about, what facilities would they potentially be interested in using, and quite frankly, for the mayor, to garner support from the city when it's time to fund this bad boy.
Might be a very good, good idea for the communications working group to tackle.
And just, if I could just add to that, the number one question that I have been getting from folks who are not parents in the district or people who aren't affiliated with the school at all is, do we really need a new high school? That's the number one question that I get. So I think my perspective would be that we probably need to do a little more outreach in the community at large before we throw a survey out there, so that people understand the context of why they're, why this is happening at all. I just don't think the rest of the community's there yet, despite the fact that we have all of this on television and a website. We've been, we're doing our best. I think we have to take that up a notch before we engage everybody.
I agree, and I mean, so many people that I've talked to are like curious, and they've never been in high school. A significant portion of Salem do, if they had kids, this is later in their life, or they don't have kids, or when they went here, it was a perfectly fine high school. So there's a real disconnect in
That would work everything. But, you know, does this give us opportunity to begin to expand that outreach a little bit more? And is it useful for you? I mean, if it's not, you know, you're not gonna get the right information back on the survey from the grade that you're seeking.
Well, we try to ask questions that would be useful, but I think it's useful for all the reasons you said.
Yeah.
And I totally agree, it's probably not ready yet because people don't have the context of why they're receiving it. And maybe we start with the faculty, staff, and students, and that's more appropriate. And then we work towards the community survey, and we can even look at those questions in that framework.
Or could this be parent survey, and then there's a
Sure.
community survey that's broader later?
All right, let's look at that. We'll look at that tomorrow, or, you know, before we put it out there, maybe we'll look at that survey through the lens of parents, because they were part of the group that would get it, and see if that makes sense. So that's a good idea.
Okay, so we are next gonna flip into getting a recap on the visioning workshop.
All right, well, bless you. We're gonna go through this. How many people attended the visioning workshop? Okay, so all of this is online, and most of you were there, so I think we'll go through this rather quickly because, for all the obvious reasons. Here's the agenda that you saw. It was conducted on November 21st with a mixed group of constituents, including staff and faculty and students administration. We had 3 hours of engagement. There were 55 attendees, 10 groups, 4 storytellers, 3 TED Talks, and 6 activities, and everything was branded to the work, to represent the work we're doing. We had 3 storytellers, and they were excellent, and they talked about their most memorable experience. We won't make Nate do it again, but he was very good. We learned a lot about his girls. A student and Ben, one of your teachers in the school. We had TED Talks around health and wellness by Dr. Atlin, Global Stewardship by our very own Patrick Cunningham, and the future of science, Jeff Zinda, our practice leader. And I really recommend everyone online and listening here today, and if you haven't seen it, watch it. We have a link, and there's a link there, but we can send it around. We also asked everyone to create a press release saying if the school opened, what are you excited about empowering the students for opportunities? And people completed that. Hard to read, realize their goals and dreams. I'm not going to read all of these because it's too much, but people gave a lot of great feedback. We also asked people for their educational priorities and aspirations for the school, and we summarized them here: pioneering new research, STEM and STEAM, connecting the community, student-centered exploration, project-based learning, self-guided, moving beyond interdisciplinary integration of CTE, creating with technologies, etc. So we got some really good feedback, and really good feedback for us to do design work. What are your facilities priorities and aspirations? So the first one was education. This is facilities. We had great feedback: natural light, corridors as collaboration spaces, interconnecting classrooms, small breakout rooms. We were talking today with Kim Carter about that, flexible spaces, on, and you can read this in your free time. Is this okay to go through it like this without reading everything?
Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing to pause on there, I think,
Yep.
that will be really significant as we start to look at how we use the site and how we configure the building is this idea of distributing CTE through academics. That obviously has a really big effect on how we lay out the site, how we provide access to those CTE spaces from the exterior, and how we create a kind of scaffold for the building. So there are things in here that might sound kind of obvious. There are other things that are really, really significant for the development of the building.
And you know, what that means is you don't put all the CTE in the back of the building hidden. You make it visible and you make it part of the learning academic environment, so it's a fully integrated. Then we gave a little talk, showed some aspirational teaching and learning spaces and gave everyone a little card of those spaces where they can then put a happy face, sad face, medium face on what they thought about it, and someone said they liked this idea of studios. There was a smiley face. It supports a different kind of teaching and learning where everything is flexible. They saw a picture of the auditorium and said long overdue and very needed. That wasn't just Ben. But it was also Ben, or that could have been Ben. This one got an unhappy face because they didn't like the antique cars and they said it didn't look like real life. We thought it was a good picture, but okay, fair enough. And then the person here really liked the flexible idea, and that's really important. And we think every space in the building should be as flexible as possible. People liked the idea of branding and said it respected the population and students, and that's what we would aim to do in the future building. There was lots of discussion about the challenges and benefits of 7 through 12, and the challenges were around scheduling of shared spaces, which Margaret talked about earlier, traffic and logistics, onboarding parents, separating middle and high school, before and after school supervision, all of which you have heard many times and repeatedly in the community meetings and in the visioning session. Benefit shared resources and spaces, mentorship and collaboration, advanced and flexible course opportunities, staff collaboration, access to specialized spaces, more expensive extracurricular choice, extensive, not expensive, extracurricular choices, and strengthens community and culture. And then we gave everyone a really challenging exercise, and the architects in the room had to hold back a little because they, you know, held all the answers, but it was a critical adjacency. So in the left, you see we provided all these different spaces, and then we asked people to, you know, create a diagram of where those spaces should go to enhance teaching, learning, and the opportunities for faculty and staff. Does anybody want to talk? Is anybody's solution up here?
Did your board make it?
Did your board make it to the show? No? Do you remember? It all looks like a bunch of dots, but okay. All of this will be summarized in our final report, and more solutions will be there. We then asked, in the end, we did a word cloud on Menti, and we asked people what was one aspirational idea that you loved, and the words that are the biggest were said the most, which was community, belonging, convergence, vocational skills, pride, and flexibility. Those are the biggest words, and those were said the most. And then we've been busy. We had 3 community meetings, 2 in person, 1 over Zoom. You can see the recap here. I'm not going to recap all of this. What are your greatest hopes for the future Salem High School? And we summarize them by meeting. And then the next slide has some additional responses, all of which were really great. I think people really have their hearts and minds in the right place, thinking about student wellness and mental health, equity for all the students, you know, STEAM, don't forget the A, you know, smart transportation planning. So you have really great ideas coming from the folks who attended these meetings. We also talked about challenges and benefits, and in the community meetings, and we received answers, and some of them were similar. Someone talked about wraparound services for challenge, although that could be also of benefits, and social emotional needs vary greatly. And I think most of them tracked in a similar way. We have also been up to looking at this number tracks to that, remember that little template we showed you and all the requirements? 3.14 is what's required, and this is evaluation of existing conditions. So all the consultants and our team members came to look at the facility and update the existing conditions. And I just want to say something that maybe, and not tonight, but one benefit of showing these slides is for the population who doesn't know the building. You all know it, but sometimes we show these slides, which are in the appendix, so people in the community can see the condition of the school. So I don't know if that's a separate little thing we do maybe on Zoom or something, where we can just get the consultants to do a little existing condition report and not take up this whole meeting. But I just was thinking about this just now when you were talking about a lot of people don't know what the building's like, but if you look at the pictures and we can have them really big and the consultants can go through them, and they'll be happy to do it on Zoom, they could go through that. And I think that might be a really good thing to put out there. So
Yeah, one thing we've seen in other communities is just having somebody go through and do a video tour of the building and just describe the condition the building's in, what it needs, what it doesn't have, and put that on the website so that it's really accessible and kind of upfront at the beginning of the project, so that with the kind of experts.
Can we take a sledgehammer with us?
You can take a sledgehammer with it, but with that, with maybe some clips from kind of our consultants speaking in more technical terms about the state of the systems of the building, together paints a picture of the honest state of the building. So.
Yeah, can I just,
Please.
I mean, I think I've been on other projects where that is a very compelling, narrative for people, especially for those who
yeah.
don't have kids in the school. I mean, the kids will do a great job of telling you that there's no heat,
Yeah.
where, you know,
Hey, let the kids do the video.
I
What,
actually think the kids would be
I
really
think they'd be great.
powerful to do it.
do you have a film club?
And some of the
There
teachers
you go.
too, to show where the issues lie in the building.
Awesome. That would be really fun. And then we could still do the consultant presentation, and we can,
Splice it together.
yeah, I mean, you can decide, do you want it to be live? Do you want us to do it and then put it up on the website? Do you want it to be live and you do a recording of it? Just tell us what you want. That's fine. We'll make that happen. That's really easy. The next slide shows just samples of the reports. So in the appendix, you'll see some of the slides and the summaries, because Sammy Otis here sent us, how many pages? 18 pages of existing conditions, and I said, could you summarize that in the slide? So in the deck, in the back of this deck, in the appendix, you'll see the summary slides, and you'll be able to see that, but you'll get all of this content in the PDP report, and it will be extensive.
What's the PDP report?
Is that a pop quiz?
It could be a pop quiz. Does anybody remember?
Oh, Betsy's
Good.
okay.
She used a calculator to figure out the 1.5, and she wrote down PDP.
Excellent. In addition to that other work, we have, our team is going through went through the building and then taking the plans we have and documenting these plans. And the reason this is important, I won't give another pop quiz, but I really want to, is because we are doing the net square footage of every space in the building, and where's it gonna show up?
In the space summary.
You're not supposed to answer. So it's gonna show up in that space summary of all the existing spaces. We will ask someone, I don't know who it will be, to look through how we named everything, because we don't really, there are spaces we just don't know how it's being used. And especially when you look at special ed, as they go through all their spaces, and we need to know the square footage, we need to know where those rooms are. It's hard for us to do, because we could walk in a room and it might not be labeled, but someone will have, who do you think that will be?
Well, I think since Z couldn't stay, I'm gonna
But
take
Z, does Z know how every space is being used programmatically?
Maybe Z, the principal?
Z and the principal.
There we go.
Yeah, so we're gonna be right in the new year. And if we can bring physical plans, or they can use the screen, whatever they want, we will drop off some plans, and all they have to do is neatly write it in and, or make a check mark, and that would be really helpful. We're happy to sit with you, but probably don't need to, because you'll see, this just summarizes major spaces, but the detail will be every space in the building. So we started, we're pretty far along with this, almost at the point where we could use your help. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking, and 3.14 is evaluation of existing conditions site analysis, and I'm gonna turn it over to these folks on my right to take you through a larger scale perspective of the context, as well as looking at the site specifically.
Right, so we're starting to understand in detail the site, the topography, the development restrictions, the traffic and pedestrian patterns, all the things that you would expect. We also want to start by zooming way out and not just think about the kind of what's within the political boundary of the site itself, but think about how, as we transform the site, it fits into a regional context. So we understand, that much of, Salem is around rivers and the Sound, and really want to think broadly about how this site sits within the context of a kind of coastal ecosystem, and understand how that affects kind of your local site. So while the site might feel like it's kind of distant from downtown or isolated, it's really not. It's very connected to a series of coastal woodlands that stretch all the way from the Lynn Woods, to the Sound itself. And we want to be kind of respectful of that ecosystem and good partners to that ecosystem as we develop the site. Everything, flows downriver. The Forest River is one of the healthier rivers that feeds the Sound. We want to keep it that way, so we want to think about green infrastructure on the site and be really conscious about kind of how this site affects the aquifer, how we're recharging the aquifer, and how we minimize the kind of burden on municipal systems, both for cost and economy. We're digging into traffic and access. We're not going to kind of deep dive into that tonight, because we just, quite frankly, need to kind of get into the data more. But just know that that is a really, really important part of how we understand how the site will change. And we'll come back probably with a bigger kind of discussion and report on traffic and all of the impacts. Starting to get in at the site level, a couple of things just to note. Our access to great light is really from what you would consider almost the back of the building right now. So southern exposure is really the back side of the site. And that's important because we want to think about how the renovation or new spaces really harvest daylight in an efficient way, control glare, and create great outdoor spaces where you really want to be in those shoulder seasons. The other thing to consider is kind of where the prevailing winds are. Our cooling winds are from the south. Our winter winds that are harsher are really from what we would consider the kind of entry side of the site right now. So if it feels a bit like a windswept area on the front of the site, that's because it is. Your front door is almost something that funnels those cold winds. And as we think about sculpting the building, changing the building, we want to kind of protect the entries and make pleasant spaces to be outside. And we're kind of recognizing that as a challenge for kind of exterior public space. We've got our light is on the back side of the building, and our wind is on the entry side of the building. So a bit of a challenge, but not something we can't overcome, just something to think about.
Great. So I will say, as a civil engineer, I really appreciate that Perkins will put this together where 3.14 be the site, so the pie is what we're working with to start with. It was great planning on their part. All the major utilities are really available to this site, right? You have water, sewer, electricity, drainage, stormwater. We're looking at that, but then more so as a deep dive, as Patrick was saying, into stormwater resiliency, right? We want to understand how we can use low impact development, right? That's kind of the engineering phrase for green infrastructure of design from that perspective. And this site is not within a floodplain, and you're not dealing with sea rise like a lot of your other schools, So luckily, that allows us to focus and work on the resiliency to help protect that overall riverine of how this gets fed. MEPA is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. There are potential triggers that could happen, all right? And it's pretty common for a high school project of this size. 25 acres of disturbance, creation of 5 acres or more of impervious area. We really feel for now we're under that with what you're looking at for this current development. If you're doing more at some places, I think that's where you start to trigger over. And that's a critical process from a time perspective. If you do get into triggering something with MEPA, we are within an environmental justice community, and you'll go through that process.
Is the 5 acres a net addition?
It's a net addition,
Okay.
yes. The 25 acres disturbance is a disturbance, though.
Okay,
You know, when you start to get to these larger campuses, that gets to be a challenge.
thank you.
And that's why the 5 acres stays under, because otherwise your building gets to be that size right away. All right. So looking at a site analysis, one of the things you have happen is you have your entrance corridor overlay district right across the front off of Highland Ave. If we do work in that first 150 feet, we'd go through a design process there. Additionally, that is a Mass DOT road, so any new access out or work that's coming on or off of Highland Ave is going to have input and final decision from the state. So Mass DOT is going to be the approving process for anything coming off of there. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but it's something to consider, especially as you start looking at traffic, and the traffic engineers will weigh much more than us on this. Wilson Ave impacts obviously Highland, but the way to redistribute that is something to think about. Mass DOT will have a big say in that. There's a New England Power company, doesn't exist anymore. My mother worked for it years and years ago, but has a big easement through here. What that easement has is it does not allow for any building or structure within that easement as it works its way through. Additionally, they don't want significant change in grade, right? And it has to do with power lines and protecting those poles. There's been parking and work that's been done throughout the years there, but it does limit, and that's why it's hatched in here, the building, right? It starts to cut off the campus in that way. Topography, ledge throughout the site. Everyone knows that. It has limitations on building to a point, not so much, but there definitely have big cost implications to that. Cut and fill and overall earthwork costs. Again, MSBA very much limits the site costs, and this comes into play of what they will cover versus the town or the city. Wetlands, you have wetlands throughout the site. You've hit the everything, so we'll keep going. That's why they brought the civil engineer here.
That's why they were the only one invited to this meeting, as you can see.
So you have wetlands, you have state regulations, you have local ordinance, which really says that you don't want disturbance in building within 50 feet. That's what those hatch areas start to show. You start to see that front corner gets really difficult to build in, and then the back of the building as it encroaches on the easement, right, starts to come into play. You've got a lot more space over to kind of the western side of the site and south up front. There's a lot of things you can look at though and be creative when you have a Perkins and Will here.
Yes, we love him. What if you disturb, can you replicate?
She wants to ask questions. She wouldn't let you do it, Marty.
If you disturb that buffer, can you replicate?
You can. Wetlands and buffer. The buffer is just going to be on a local level. That's just a conservation. So the state will not come in on that. Quite often, other than precedent in how the Conservation Commission has looked at it, there's a lot of opportunity to work within that buffer. Even wetlands, you can serve up to 5,000 square feet. You need a significant alternative analysis to do that, though. All right. I think they've said I'm done talking.
Well, which side are we on?
When you overlay all of those.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when you overlay, you can see the hatch of areas really that start to encroach in and not necessarily bisect, but take that back third. Gets challenging to connect through for a building.
Now they know why they hired us, because there's no site left.
That's
Thank you. So,
And that's a two-dimensional look, right? When you start looking three-dimensionally, it takes a lot more than a preliminary look at it. And I think that's one of the challenges here. This really shows a flat site, which this is not.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
conclusion really is, tricky site, seems big, but when you look at the ledge areas and these areas that are kind of politically out of play, it's gonna be a challenge, and it means that we should really think hard about, exterior program, the size of the building, whether or not the building goes more vertical, and really consider how we conserve the kind of footprint of those interventions, both to keep the cost down, also to keep the disturbance down on the kind of ecology that we've talked about, and really to maximize the use of the site.
Mayor, this next slide, do you want to lead on this one?
Sure. So this is building off of something that had been circulated to the committee back from a ULI study that was done in 2020. That looked at housing opportunities on the existing campus site. We revisited it with the understanding that this project was advancing, and went back to ULI that identified some area along Highland Ave in this general vicinity where housing opportunity could still be met, depending on what the campus configuration looks like eventually. The idea being there's a possibility for multifamily housing, specifically targeting supportive housing for homeless families, to bring down the number of homeless students in the district and reduce costs, but also to potentially create a district improvement financing mechanism that would put this portion of property onto the tax rolls eventually, and use that property tax growth to pay for this portion of the debt costs for the school building project, and reduce the amount that we need to ask for a debt exclusion. Obviously the priority project is the school project, and they're not linked in any way, but just wanted to go through an exercise to see if there's still feasibility of creating a few acres of housing here. Ultimately, it was about 5.5 acres around the Salerno building, fronting on Highland Avenue.
And that may have some triggers, so thinking about all the other slides leading up to this, I mean, I think we all know it's very aspirational and a really wonderful idea, and the question is, can we do it? What are the challenges? And we'll be weighing that as we approach the site planning.
Also cataloging just the existing quantity of parking, what are your existing assets for athletics, and just beginning to quantify what's there and, what are the challenges with what's there.
And again, we said earlier, when we developed the program, while there isn't a particular slot in the educational space summary for parking and fields and all of these things, we need to get a handle on that, and we need someone to help us with that, because we usually have someone help us with parking and knowing the middle school's coming and how much staff will you have and how will you manage the senior parking and those kinds of things. We will need your input on.
Sorry, the one thing that you're just thinking of that everyone here knows, but has a huge effect on the space available to this site, is you have the Horseman School on site, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have shared parking with that also. And while we didn't show that as non-buildable area, it really is, and it starts to eat in more of what you can do and what MSBA is going to require of you really going throughout this site and making sure you have everything available for these studies at these early phases. And that's something that it's going to have to be spelled out too.
So that's the end of our portion of the presentation, and we're happy to take questions, and you can also send them to the co-chairs for our response later as you review the presentation. Thank you.
I'm actually amazed that we got through this. Jenna? Go ahead.
I'm just gonna put in a plug for, overall sustainability, but that includes, the giant ledge in between the two. I just think it creates such a nice space, and Salem's lost so much of its ledge, and the whole lasting, a lot of the Salem community sort of, that's a trigger, and I know it's there, but to me, if we can think of a way, of actually integrating it more around it, or somehow integrating it without having to blast that big ledge in the middle. It's a neat high space in Salem, and, I think to spend a
It does.
Is all the volcanic ledge.
And I think those spaces are part of that kind of the ecological assets that are on the site that we need to, quite frankly, dive a little bit more seriously into to understand, you know, what are those habitats on the site that we want to be part of, right? So I think it's unique in a number of different ways, and we should be working creatively to integrate it.
Not opposed to some, but it's just.
Right.
Yeah.
To go right for the big one in the middle is like,
Yeah,
even though it's right in the middle, I get that.
Thank you for bringing that up.
yeah.
So, there's one other item. We don't have Anthony here tonight. So
No.
are you gonna?
Anna is going to do
Anna?
it, yeah.
So we need to get an update from the finance working group, which managed to fall off of the agenda before we publish it. So, Anna, are you able to give us an update?
Yes, bear with me 1 second. I had it up. So, report of the finance working group met on November 7th, 2024, reviewed a proposal from the June school committee retreat for November 23rd for $1,750 that received unanimous approval. Met November 26th, 2024, reviewed the answer invoice package number 3 for $32,354.38 for October 2024. That was unanimously approved. Met December 18th, reviewed answer invoice package number 4 for $25,513.13 for November 2024. That was unanimously approved. Reviewed the attuned invoice for $1,750 for the school committee retreat. That was unanimously approved. Reviewed the MSBA ProPay system. The first MSBA reimbursement request has been submitted. Lisa Golden will enter requests into ProPay and alert answer to review those requests before those are submitted to the MSBA. Thank you.
Nate, back to you.
Where are we?
We are at
Are
other
there any other
issues not
questions for-
anticipated by the
So,
chairs.
no,
I was just gonna say, are there any other questions for Brooke and her team? I thought that was an excellent summary. I know it's a lot of territory to cover, so I appreciate that. But, I don't know if there were other questions about the material they presented about existing conditions.
Just to show you, we're not gonna go through it, but as you, one more slide, this is where you'll find, when you get the deck, all of these slides that are the summary slides from the consultants. And if they, you know, so this is the kind of thing they would go over if they gave a presentation.
Perfect.
And I think these slides can start to form the basis for what people need to, in the community need to know about the building, so.
I just want to come back to the working groups. Again, just reiterate, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me directly. Margaret was kind enough to put together a charge for each working group, so we'll make sure we get that out to you so you get a sense of what the work will entail. And then I'll send that out to all of you. And then again, in the meantime, just start thinking about someone to chair that. And again, it's not a heavy lift, but it's just to kind of schedule meetings and then maybe report back to the larger committee. Because we're going to start doing that right after the break.
Yeah, and overall, I would say the charge of the working groups, in whatever area they are, is to provide feedback to the consultants and to make recommendations to this committee in your area of expertise. So, you know, sort of different
standard.
groups, same general charge. So.
Anything else?
All right, just
If
a
you're looking for
reminder-
Christmas gifts, I wear an extra large. I wear a size 12 shoe.
So the next meeting, you have it on paper in front of you, is January 16th. Next meeting is January 16th, so hopefully everybody will get a break. I talked to Dominic briefly this morning, and he said there is just too short of a time this year between Thanksgiving and the winter holiday. That is the truth, so.
So that extra meeting in February is the 27th, not the 28th, which is on the.
Yeah, it will be the 27th. I think because that's the Thursday. And we'll get hold of, you know, everybody's calendars.
6 exciting time. It's real. It's real.
Thank you for all of your help, your enthusiasm, and your, this incredibly functional committee and school committee, who I really enjoyed the day with them. We appreciate it. We're happy to work with a group that provides such responses.
We cannot leave without an opportunity for public comment. Hearing none? Motion to, oh,
Actually, I did want to say one thing just about the community meetings, that there is the community meeting scheduled for the 13th, thank you.
Yeah, it's gonna be in Spanish, with English translation.
Yeah. So we'll get the word out. We have this flyer up.
Our flyer's done, but I thought you were gonna translate it, or you were gonna get translation?
Necesitamos alguien para
Do you trust him?
decir.
No, I mean, you know, we can get someone in our office to translate it, but how?
We can.
You typically you have. And also, we have to translate every slide in the deck.
Okay.
You might use less words on the deck, but, I mean, it would be
You're
weird.
talking about the community meeting deck, not this deck.
No, I'm talking about the January 13th meeting, when we're giving the presentation in Spanish.
Yeah, can you strip the deck down a little bit?
Yeah, we'll do
We
that.
can get it. Yeah, we gotta get the flyer because we've gotta send it out.
Let's get the flyer first.
That needs to be done tomorrow.
And the meeting's gonna be at Espacio,
Yeah.
North Shore, Community
We
CDC.
have the flyer.
anything else? All right, motion to adjourn? So moved. Second? Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holidays. Get a chance to enjoy family and friends.